How is it possible that one of the strangest and most persistent fallacies about our origins still circulates today and just might be lodged in your own mind? You may have heard someone declare that we evolved directly from apes you can visit at the local zoo, or from monkeys swinging in tropical forests. Yet according to volumes of fossil evidence and comparative genetics, that picture is deeply flawed. In this video, we are unpacking 5 of the biggest myths about evolution that continue to puzzle, mislead, or spark endless debate. This material has been rigorously tested in scientific circles, but popular discourse still brims with misunderstandings. Some are subtle, some blatant, and most are surprisingly compelling at first glance. If you are ready to challenge your assumptions and discover how science illuminates the real story of life's unfolding tapestry, stay with us through every crucial revelation. Chapter 1: The myth that humans evolved from modern apes or monkeys. You can visualize the image, a neat progression of monkey to ape, to stooped caveman, to upright modern human. That iconic chain is etched into countless textbooks and cartoons, fueling the misconception that the chimp in the zoo is literally your ancestor. But scientifically, that's not how it works. Evolution is not a ladder where one living species just morphs into another. Instead, we have compelling genetic and fossil evidence showing that humans and modern apes share an ancestor, an earlier primate population that existed roughly 6 to 8 million years ago. That branching point gave rise to separate lineages, one eventually producing us and the other leading to chimpanzees, along with other close relatives. In fact, modern chimpanzees have been evolving on their own path all this time, picking up new adaptations and losing others. So the real story is not that you descended from a chimpanzee, but that both you and the chimp descended from a long-extinct primate species. This is why the evolutionary tree is a branching phenomenon, a great bush of diverse lineages, rather than a single file line. When you hear that humans share over 98% of their DNA with chimps, that's powerful evidence that we emerged from a common genetic starting point. It's not that today's apes froze in time as our lesser evolved ancestors. They too have navigated millions of years of adaptation. Breaking that first myth began with key fossil finds, like Ardipithecus and Sahelanthropus, organisms that displayed a blend of monkey-like and more hominin-like traits. Scientists compare skull shapes, knee joints, and pelvic structures to decipher how these creatures moved about. Meanwhile, geneticists assess the mutational differences across species DNA to estimate divergence dates. Both methods converge on the idea that neither modern humans nor modern chimpanzees physically represent that ancestor, yet both are living experiments of evolution. Consider how you relate to your cousins. You share grandparents, but you didn't come from your cousin, nor did your cousin come from you. Applied to our ape partners on the tree of life, we see that same logic of shared ancestry. This knowledge clarifies that when someone says, "If we came from monkeys, why are there still monkeys around?" it betrays a misunderstanding of branching evolutionary pathways. There is no reason for the ancestral population to disappear just because a divergence happened, unless environmental or other pressure led to extinction. The essence is that multiple lineages can and do persist simultaneously. By picturing evolution as an expansive bush, we avoid the false idea that one living species is the direct blueprint of another. With that foundation, we can dismiss the simplistic chain of being visual. Now, we move on to an equally stubborn misunderstanding, thinking that evolution is merely a hunch dressed up as science. Let's explore the weight behind the word theory in Chapter 2. Chapter 2: The myth that evolution is just a theory. Perhaps you have heard this phrase weaponized to downplay the massive evidentiary base supporting evolutionary biology. People can interpret theory as synonymous with guesswork, like saying, "I have a theory my dog ate the pie." However, in science, a theory is a robust framework that explains a wide array of phenomena. Evolutionary theory stands alongside germ theory, which underpins how we understand diseases, and gravitational theory, describing how masses attract matter. Scientists don't casually confer theory status. It's earned through consistent, repeated testing, broad explanatory power, and resilience under scientific scrutiny. Dismissing evolution because it's just a theory is akin to dismissing atomic theory, which tells us that matter is composed of atoms, or discounting the entire field of virology because it's based on well-tested theories of how viruses replicate. Crucially, the evidence for evolution is vast and includes fossils, comparative anatomy, molecular genetics, and biogeography. Archaeopteryx is a classic transitional fossil linking dinosaurs and birds, while Tiktaalik shows features bridging fish and early tetrapods. Our own DNA holds relics of shared heritage, from pseudogenes in humans and chimps to the near-universal genetic code that knits life together on Earth. By weaving these threads, scientists maintain that evolution is an overarching explanatory umbrella that accounts for the staggering diversity of life now and in the past. Let's delve deeper into what makes it a true scientific theory instead of just a mere guess. When scientists say theory, they refer to a comprehensive, testable, and widely accepted explanation that pulls together multiple strands of evidence. Evolutionary theory unifies biology by explaining how traits arise, change, and distribute across populations over time. For example, consider molecular biology. If two species share a recent ancestor, their DNA sequences will reflect fewer differences than species that diverged millions more years ago. This is precisely what we observe in everything from primates to fish to flowering plants. Because of these converging lines of data, fossils, embryological patterns, molecular markers, biologists overwhelmingly affirm evolution as a cornerstone of modern science. It's not an untested notion. In fact, if you accept that viruses mutate, creating new variants, then you already recognize evolution in action. Real-world examples are legion. Antibiotic-resistant bacteria and pesticide-resistant insects illustrate natural selection. Understanding evolution isn't optional for comprehending the biological web of life. It's an indispensable lens clarifying how organisms come to thrive in their particular niches. By internalizing that the word theory in science signals robust consensus rather than shaky guesswork, you sidestep this widespread misconception. Next, we address a related misunderstanding: the belief that evolution marches steadily up the ladder to more perfect, more complex forms, culminating in us, presumably the highest rung on that imaginary ladder. Chapter 3. The myth that evolution always means progress toward perfection or greater complexity. It's tempting and flattering to see evolution as a linear process culminating in the brilliance of humankind, as though nature had us in mind all along. This anthropocentric bias paints a picture of a hierarchy. Microbes at the bottom, with each rung up the evolutionary ladder more advanced until we reach the apex. Yet, evolutionary science counters that there is no inherent trajectory toward complexity or any universal ideal. Natural selection shapes organisms to fit local environments in ways that maximize survival and reproduction, not to fulfill some cosmic plan of ever-increasing sophistication. Some lineages do grow more complex over time, but others simplify if their ecological niche rewards efficiency over elaborate structures. Look at parasites that have lost entire organ systems once crucial for free-living ancestors. Or observe how bacteria inhabit virtually every niche on the planet, in part due to their streamlined cellular structure and rapid adaptability. The idea of more advanced becomes meaningless once you realize that the so-called simplest microbe can outnumber and outlast an entire population of complex mammals under the right conditions. The best metaphor is not an upward staircase but a branching bush, with each twig representing a unique evolutionary exploration. That's how crocodiles can remain morphologically stable for millions of years, while other organisms branch out in new directions. All are simply adapting to what works in their specific contexts. Let's break down how that works in detail. When natural selection acts on a trait, be it a physical limb, a behavioral quirk, or a biochemical pathway, it does so in response to immediate pressures: predators, climate, pathogens, mate choice, or resource availability. If an organism's traits match the environment well, it flourishes and reproduces. If they do not, the lineage can shift over time or fail altogether. Complexity can evolve if it confers an advantage, like the development of specialized limbs or elaborate brains, but only if those features prove advantageous. In many lineages, staying simple remains optimal. Think about sharks, which have retained essential body forms for hundreds of millions of years. They haven't been lazy or stuck. They've been successful enough that major overhauls weren't selected for. Meanwhile, some invertebrates have evolved highly complex social structures or warning coloration patterns. There is no universal directionality, no ladder of living things from lowest to highest. Each branch is an experiment shaped by historical contingencies, mutation, drift, and selection. The notion that evolution inevitably aims for beings like us misrepresents how adaptation works. Once we drop that progress myth, we move neatly into our next misconception, that an individual can evolve new traits during its lifetime and hand them down. Let's tackle that in Chapter 4. Chapter 4: The myth that individual organisms evolve during their lifetime. Picture the old notion that giraffes got their long necks because each generation stretched higher and higher, passing on that acquired trait to their offspring. This idea takes its cue from the once popular Lamarckian perspective, suggesting that changes in an individual's body, through use or disuse, could be inherited. Today, modern biology is crystal clear. Evolution occurs through changes in the genetic composition of populations over multiple generations, not by individuals reworking their DNA to match the environment. An individual organism can certainly adapt in a temporary sense. You might deepen your lung capacity if you train at high altitude, or your skin can tan in response to sunlight. Yet, these acquired characteristics don't magically integrate into the genetic code stored in your reproductive cells. Only through random mutations, genetic recombination, and the differential survival of certain variants does the population gene pool shift. Epigenetics, while it can regulate gene expression in flexible ways, does not overturn the fundamental principle that heritable changes originate in the genome passed from parent to offspring. Understanding this distinction is crucial to grasp how populations evolve, not individuals. The next section details how variation, selection, and inheritance interlock to drive these gradual but profound shifts. Think of evolution as a grand statistical shift across generations. Within any population, there's variation in traits, some heritable, some not. If having a slightly longer neck helps a giraffe reach more food in a scarce environment, that giraffe might survive longer and have more offspring carrying that longer neck gene. Over many generations, neck length shifts statistically in the population. The environment selects for some traits against others, and sometimes it's purely random processes like genetic drift that alter gene frequencies. The result is not that each giraffe decides to elongate its neck and bequeaths this new length to its baby. Rather, small genetic differences accumulate and successful variants proliferate. This is evolution in action, a population-level change in inherited traits over time. That principle leads us directly into our final myth, the oft-quoted survival of the fittest, too frequently interpreted as a callous, brute force competition among only the fiercest organisms. Let's see why that phrase can be misleading if taken at face value. Chapter 5: The myth that survival of the fittest means only the strongest, fastest, or most aggressive survive. The phrase originated with philosopher Herbert Spencer after reading Darwin's work, and Darwin himself used it in later editions of On the Origin of Species. However, its shorthand form can give a distorted impression that evolution favors only brawn or aggression. Biologically, fitness refers to reproductive success, how well an organism's traits enable it to survive and pass those traits on. Strength and speed can be advantageous in certain contexts, but camouflage, disease resistance, or even altruistic behavior can be just as important depending on the environment. A tiny bacterium with high replication rates in a nutrient-rich environment is extremely fit, even if it does not conform to our usual ideas of strength. The environment dictates which traits matter, and that environment can range from scorching deserts to ice-cold tundras, or from the bloodstream of a mammal to the underside of a leaf. Cooperation, parental care, strategic avoidance, or specialized feeding tactics frequently outcompete sheer physical might or aggression, especially when you consider survival over countless generations. Let's see how that works in practice with a few potent examples. In many ecosystems, an organism's fitness is tied to factors well beyond brute force. Meerkats exemplify this principle through cooperative vigilance. One individual keeps watch for predators, enabling the entire group, often kin, to forage more safely and reproduce more successfully. For that environment, group cooperation is a winning evolutionary strategy. In other contexts, flamboyant traits matter more than aggression. A peacock's enormous, iridescent tail demands a lot of energy and could attract predators. Yet peahens prefer such tails, interpreting them as signals of genetic quality, so the flamboyant male can father more offspring, thereby increasing his evolutionary fitness. Meanwhile, an organism's environment might shift drastically, and the traits that once conferred the highest fitness might suddenly become liabilities. This fluid nature of adaptation ensures that evolution is not about unstoppable linear progress, but about negotiated survival, shaped by the interplay of heritable traits, environment, and random events. Now that we have tackled these 5 prevalent myths, our understanding of evolution broadens. Let's take a moment to reflect on the bigger picture and the unanswered questions that remain. Our journey through these misconceptions highlights how central evolution is to modern biology, and how readily it is misunderstood in everyday conversation. Each myth took root in part because they are easy to visualize or appealing to certain biases. The idea of descending directly from an existing ape, thinking evolution is unsubstantiated guesswork, assuming there's a neat path from simple to complex, visualizing individuals evolving in real time, or believing only alpha brutes prevail, these misconceptions can be captivating yet inaccurate. Consider how much this scientific field has revolutionized our worldview since Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace first proposed natural selection. By connecting the dots from fossils to genetics, from ecosystems to cellular processes, evolution helps us see that we are part of a continuum, shaped by the same forces guiding all life. It doesn't imply we are meaningless or that morality is moot. It simply provides a framework for how life diversified. History, environment, and chance all mix in ways that shape living beings over millennia. This vantage point can inspire humility and wonder, reminding us that we share distant kinship with every creature on Earth. But even now, evolutionary science brims with active inquiries that thrill researchers. How exactly did human cognition become so capable of abstract thought and language? Which obscure transitional species remain to be discovered in the fossil record? How do epigenetic markers influence traits across generations without rewriting the underlying DNA sequence? And how might humanity's genetic legacy shift in response to rapidly changing environmental conditions and new technologies? Each question opens new frontiers. For instance, we continually refine our estimates of when we split from the last common ancestor with chimpanzees as new fossil and genetic data come to light. Or in more recent times, we're piecing together how interbreeding with Neanderthals and Denisovans contributed genetic variants that still exist in modern humans. There's no final answer that seals the evolutionary story. It's a living tapestry, unraveling at the edges, revealing new threads with every scientific advance. By appreciating this ongoing exploration, we grasp that science, especially evolution, is dynamic, self-correcting, and perpetually incomplete. Precisely for that reason, it's all the more compelling to engage with it. Evolution remains one of the most substantiated and yet most debated scientific topics in public discourse. Now that we've clarified 5 major misunderstandings concerning common ancestry, the strength of scientific theory, the absence of a linear trajectory toward perfection, the population-level mechanism of change, and the true meaning of fitness, how do these insights shape your view of the natural world? Are there further misconceptions you find intriguing or unresolved? You are encouraged to explore the academic literature and critically assess every new claim, whether it's a sensational headline about a missing link or evidence for some newly discovered adaptation. Let's keep the conversation going. Share your thoughts, questions, or conflicting viewpoints. Ask yourself what resonates most deeply about the evolutionary framework and what unsettles you or challenges your prior assumptions. Progress in scientific understanding thrives on open dialogue and robust discussion. By dissecting myths and clarifying truths, we collectively sharpen the picture of life's shared heritage. Where does your curiosity lead you next?